Hi, everyone. My name is Carla Berry, and this is the SAT Calculator Strategies workshop that I am offering in partnership with the Safety Harbor and Seminole Public Libraries. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes as more people join, and then we are going to dive on into the graphing calculator to see what it can do for you on test day. You should have received an email from me earlier today with the materials that we will be covering during today's workshop. I sent out the first digital nonlinear practice test. So hopefully you are all familiar with how the SAT has gone digital in 2024. So it's now a digital adaptive test. So the test that I sent out for us to look at together today is not adaptive. It's in paper form, but it's easier for a workshop format to use the paper form than to log into the Blue Book app. And then I also sent out a link to download the calculator guide, which can be really useful. And it will make a lot more sense after today's workshop than if you snuck a peek before today's workshop. So I am going to go ahead and actually I am going to open up. Usually I am very iPad heavy during my workshops because I like writing on there and showing you how to do the problems. But for this particular workshop, I am going to be relying on my computer a little bit more since I can share screen side by side with my computer. So I'll be able to show you the graphing calculator and also actual test questions. So let me just pull this up on my computer. And just a couple of housekeeping things. You can see me. I cannot see or hear you. So if you have any questions, please take advantage of the chat button or the Q&A feature. With the Q&A feature, you can ask questions anonymously, but please don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no such thing as a silly question. I love all questions. So go ahead and give me your questions as they arise. If I go over something really quickly and you're not sure what I did or how I got to the answer, if it was too fast, please let me know that too, so I can slow down or go through the question again and all the procedures to get to the answer. So the thing about the graphing calculator is it can really make SAT questions significantly easier to answer, but there's two parts with mastering the graphing calculator. And let me actually, since I do like writing, I'll write this part out on my iPad, and then we'll go into the actual calculator. So the first thing about the calculator is just knowing the features. Knowing features. Knowing I did not spell features right there. We'll just say knowing the calculator. My brain is still in pool brain from taking my 1- and 3-year-old to the pool earlier today to tire them out before this workshop. Okay, so just knowing the calculator or your calculator. That's the first part. And that can feel like the biggest mountain to overcome initially, is just knowing the graphing calculator, knowing everything that it can do. And that's going to be a big part of today's workshop, is just exposing all of you to what the graphing calculator can do for you. The second part is the real mountain, and that is applying those features. I can't spell features today. Why is my brain or am I spelling it right? My brain needs to wake up for this workshop for sure. There, I did it again. Added an extra U to features. But the second hardest part is just knowing how to use those features in your calculator. So reading a question and knowing, hey, I can use my graphing calculator to answer that question. This is arguably, I would say, the hardest thing to learn. And the only way you can master this is by practice. Oops. Lots and lots of practice. So take all the resource materials that you can get your hands on from the College Board and practice these graphing calculator features with those questions. And if you do that, you will master your graphing calculator. And on test day, you'll be able to easily recognize a question where you can use your graphing calculator. So let me just pull up for CE. I have an online graphing calculator for this workshop. For the actual test, I highly recommend getting a TI-84 plus CE. I'll put that in the chat box here. And make sure that you can all use the chat box too. There, now you can all use the chat box too. So I recommend the TI-84 plus CE graphing calculator. And you can actually borrow that from the Safety Harbor Public Library, and hopefully soon also from the Seminole Public Library. Okay, let me see here. I'm going to say share my entire desktop. So now you can see everything I can see, and I'm just going to sign in here. There we go. And this is what your graphing calculator should look like on the home screen. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to run through all the features in your calculator that you should know. And then we are going to look at questions because I want to make sure that we leave no stone unturned. So I just want to get to know you all before we dive in here. How many of you have a graphing calculator or have access to a graphing calculator already by a raise of hands? So I see 4 hands, so about 5 hands, 6 hands, almost all of you. So if you do not already have one, hopefully this will inspire you to borrow one from the library or your friends or to buy one. So the first place we're going to look in the calculator is the apps. How many of you, by raise of hands, have used your apps? So I see 3 hands, 4 hands. And out of your apps, can you tell me in the chat box which apps you have used prior to today's workshop? Which apps? And I'll look at your answers in a second, but we're going to be looking at Conics, Polysmelt 2, and N equals for the SAT. So I can press second mode to quit out of the screen. To get back to the apps, I'm just going to press the apps button, which is that button right there. The first one we're going to look at is probably one of the most useful features for the SAT or the ACT if you're taking the ACT, and that is Polysmelt 2. So when I open Polysmelt 2, I actually have 2 features I could use in here. Polynomial root finder or simultaneous equation solver. So polynomial root finder I can use to solve pretty much any polynomial. So I would mostly use this for quadratic equations on the SAT, but lately since the SAT went digital, they've also added more equations that are 3rd degree polynomials where the order is 3. So you have an x cubed in there, or I don't think it would be unusual now to see x to the 4th in there. And then you could just go straight into your calculator. Because remember, when the SAT went digital, they now allow you to use your graphing calculator for all SAT math questions. There no longer is a no calculator section. So that's great news for students. So mostly we're going to say the order's 2. And then I would say 99% of the time, real solutions, and the rest we leave alone, auto, normal, float degree. And now the top row of your calculator keypad corresponds to the bottom row of this calculator screen. So when I press graph here, it's as if I am saying next. So do you see how next is the bottom right? Graph is my top right key. So when I press graph, it goes next. And then I can put in any polynomial in here. So I'm just going to say 1x squared plus 4x plus 4. We'll keep it really simple just to illustrate this app. And then I can press graph to solve it. And it says x equals -2. So that would, of course, factor to x plus 2 times x plus 2. We just flip the sign when we factor. So This is definitely a great app that we could use. I can press Y equals to go back. And then when I go, I need to make sure I'm recording today's workshop too, because I know there are people that couldn't join live. Let me just double check. They changed. Oh, I think this is the record button. Let's see. No, that's my screen share button. Give me 1 second here. Let me just make sure I am actually recording, but they keep on changing. Oh no, I am recording. They keep on changing how the keypad is for Zoom, so it throws me off where it is. Okay, so if I change the order here to 3, we would have a cubic function. Do you see that? And you would just enter the numbers exactly as they appear in the question, making sure to match it to the calculator. So let's say in the question we had 2x cubed. I'm going to make up numbers here. Don't put them in your calculator because they may not work. 2x cubed plus 3x squared plus 4x equals 5. If I put that in my calculator, I would put -5 because in the calculator, it equals 0. So I have to make the question match the calculator, and I can press graph to solve it. So that's a great feature, just using Polysmelt. And I do want to see if it allows me. I haven't seen any responses here. So by raise of hands, how many of you have used Polysmelt Polynomial Root Finder before? So I see 2 hands, so that's great if you've used this before. If you haven't, now you know it's there. We also like simultaneous equation solver. So just to recap, I can press second mode to quit out of the screen, press apps, go all the way down to Polysmelt, scroll down, and then press enter, or I could just press the number 7 on my keypad. Do you see how it's the 7th app? So that's a shortcut. So we just looked at polynomial root finder. So that's going to mainly be used to solve quadratic equations. We can also use simultaneous equation solver. So if I open up simultaneous equation solver, I can use this to solve any system of equations in standard form. So generally, we're going to have 2 equations, 2 unknowns, and then auto normal float degree, and then press graph for next. And then I can put in a system of equations here. So you can see I have a sample system of equations here. If I want to solve this, I just press graph and I solve it. And it tells me what x and y equals. By raise of hands, how many of you have used that before? Don't see any hands, so great. Now you know it's there. And we will use that for a real SAT math question later on in today's workshop. Now, something I want to expose you to, and I don't want to confuse you by showing you this, but I think I don't want to neglect mentioning this just in case it happens on your SAT. So generally, we're going to have 2 equations and 2 unknowns. We could have 3 equations and 3 unknowns. And I could go next here, and the calculator could still solve this. So let's say I had 3 variables. Now, every now and then, and this is pretty rare to happen on the SAT, so if you don't understand it, and you are also not aiming to score above a 700, above a 750 in math, just ignore me. Don't worry about what I'm about to say. You could sometimes have more unknowns than equations. So imagine I had 2 equations and 3 unknowns. When that happens, it's going to look like a matrix. Do you see that there? Now, the first box is just the first variable's coefficient. The second box is the second variable's coefficient, and the third box is the third variable's coefficient. And then that thick line that goes down is like the equal sign. So imagine I had 1x plus 1y plus 1z equals 5. And I had 2x minus 3y plus 2z equals 6. And these numbers may not work because I just made them up. And then I can press graph to solve. And do you see how it gives me my first variable, my second variable, and then my third variable? So generally, if you got a question like this on the SAT or ACT, they would just want your second variable's solution. So this would be x, y, z, x1, x2, x3. Don't worry about it if you are not aiming to score above a 700 or above a 750. And also don't worry about it, even if you are, because it may not even be on there. I just want to plant that seed just in case. Now, another rare thing that could happen in polynomial root finder. So this used to only ever really happen on the ACT, but since the SAT went digital, I'm noticing more and more that they are borrowing from the ACT. So imagine I have my orders 2, and I put in numbers and it says no real solutions or like no solutions found. You could get A plus BI solution. So you could change it to imaginary solutions here. And you would know to do that when the answer choices have the I in them and it's a polynomial. You'll know, oh, answer choices with I need to change this to A plus BI. So there will be a clue. Okay, so that is it for PolySmelt. Probably the most useful thing, possibly the most useful thing that you will learn today. So apps, PolySmelt, polynomial root finder, and simultaneous equation solver. We're going to go back to apps and look at Conics. On the ACT, they want you, or I won't say they want you, it would be very beneficial for you to know how to use the Conics app for circles, ellipses, and hyperbolas. But for the SAT, we only need to worry about conics and circles. So when I open the Circles Conics app, there are 2 options here. I'm going to go for the second one because that's slightly more confusing than the first one. And here, this is the only app that actually tells you what to do. So do you see how it says there in the yellow, press alpha solve or graph? So after you enter in the A, B, C, D terms from your question, you can either press graph and then trace and move around and see the coordinates like that for X and Y. Or you can press alpha and then enter. So we have the center and the radius without needing to complete the square. So alpha, enter gives us a center and the radius. And we'll come back to this question too, probably. I just, as I said earlier, want to make sure that we touch on everything you should know. How many of you, by a raise of hands, have ever graphed an inequality in your graphing calculator? One hand I see there. Great. So if I go to y equals right now, if I go to the left, do you see how I just have that little flickering box? And if I press enter here, nothing really happens. So I want to change that equal sign to an inequality symbol. To do that, I'm going to go to apps and then down to an equals and press enter. And then do you see how it says here, press any key? So I'm just going to press enter again. And it's the most anticlimactic app. So you open it up and it's as if nothing happened, but something did. Now, when I go to the left here, do you see I get a big rectangular flickering box that wasn't there earlier? And now I can press enter. And when I press enter, I can change that equal sign to any inequality symbol. And when I graph an inequality in here, it not only graphs it, it also shades it for me. So if I go back to y equals, let's put in another inequality like so. And I am very randomly making up equations here, so I'm hoping there's some overlap, and there is. So the overlap region here would be the solution. So remember, if you ever need to graph an inequality or match an inequality up to a graph for the SAT, you're just going to go to apps and then in equals and grab those inequality symbols, okay? And it will graph and shade for you. Those are super duper easy points. So anytime from here on forward, if you see a conics question for circles, like one of these 2, just use your apps, use the conics apps. If you ever see a polynomial equation and they want you to factor that equation or solve for x or the roots or the zeros that all pretty much means the same thing, you're just going to go to apps, PolySmelt, polynomial root finder. And if you see a system of equations in standard form, you would go to Apps, Polysmelt, Simultaneous Equation Solver. Now, there's a bunch of other good stuff in your calculator. So to illustrate some of these, I am going to pull up here. I'm going to minimize this. Questions from an older advanced math handout that still just stays so useful and relevant for the SAT. Okay, so do you see this question right here? Which of the following complex numbers is equivalent to 3 minus 5i over 8 plus 2i? Without a graphing calculator or without a calculator, you would have to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate by 8 minus 2i. But with a graphing calculator, I could simply go, oops, here we go, 3 minus 5 second. And you see this period? Above it, it has a blue I. So if I press the blue second key and then the period, I get that I. So 3 minus 5i divided by 8 plus 2 second period I. And it gives me this answer, but that doesn't match any answers. So I'm going to go math and then frac. And it's going to convert the decimal to a fraction. So remember today's session, today's workshop is recorded. So I'm going a little bit fast so we can cover everything, but I can definitely share this recording if you'd like me to, and you want to go back and look it over or get your hands on a graphing calculator from the library and then try this stuff out on your own. So now we can easily see the answer is C. So that is our I button that I want you to know about. Okay, let's look at a couple things here with our math button. So we just looked at how to convert a decimal to a fraction. So if I had 0.8, I could say math frac, and it will convert that to a fraction for me. If I press the math button and scroll down, I can find the nth root. So this means I can put any root in here and any number in here, and it will find the root. So that's going to be useful. On the ACT, use summation and log of any base. I have not seen those questions yet on the SAT. On the ACT, they also test on piecewise functions. I have not seen that yet on the SAT, but I have a suspicion that in the near future, we're going to see piecewise functions on the SAT. So I'm going to show you how to use that. If I go to y equals, and notice earlier I pressed apps and then in equals again to turn off in equals. So my in equals is turned off. A lot of times students just keep in equals running on their calculator indefinitely. I don't recommend that. I do like turning it on and off as needed. But if I go to in equals, I can go math and then go down to piecewise. And let's just do 2 pieces to make it easy. So we're going to say y equals x plus 2 for x, and I want a greater than symbol there. So I'm going to press second math for x is greater than 0. And I am going to say y equals negative 5x squared for x is second math less than negative 3. And we're going to graph that, and you can see it graphs the pieces for me, and I can zoom out even more to see those pieces. So very nice to graph piecewise functions in your calculator. So here, when we press math, we looked at converting decimals to fractions, finding the nth root, and then also finding piecewise functions or graphing piecewise functions. Arguably, the most useful feature in your math button is if you press math and you either scroll all the way to the bottom or you just go up one to numeric solver. So in numeric solver, I'm going to actually just clear. This is an older question I have here. We're going to pull up, actually let me see if I opened up practice test 10. I did not. Here, let's find just an easy question from practice test 1 to put in here. Some of these apps and features, you really need a question for it to make sense. Otherwise, it can be really confusing to look at, I think in the second module. Okay, so here, what is the solution to the given equation? Imagine this equation was way more complicated, but we're going to use this equation just to illustrate this feature. So equation solver or numeric solver can be used for any linear equation. So that means we only have one variable. That variable is not an exponent. It is not in the denominator of a fraction, and it is not inside of a radical. We're going to make one box, one side of the equation, and the other box, the other side of the equation. So I'm going to say 4x plus 5, my first box. And for my second box, I'm just going to make 165. And then I'm going to press enter and then graph to solve it. So that solves any linear equation. I'll show you again how to do it. So we're going to go math, then up one to numeric solver. Once you open up numeric solver, it's called equation solver. One box is one side of the equation, the other box is the other side of the equation. And then we just press enter and then graph to solve it. So enter and then graph. And you can use that for any linear equation. See if there's another good linear equation in here. I don't think there is. There is in practice test 10, but I'm not going to get sidetracked and go pull it up. We will later if we have time, but I want to make sure that I run through all of these calculator features so that you know they're there. So that is it for the first column here in the math button. Next, I want you to know about num, absolute value. So I can grab absolute value bars from here. And remember, absolute value bars are like the positivity machine. They make any expression positive, what's inside of them, positive. So absolute value bars, pulling them up in your calculator will be especially useful if you have a really long absolute value expression, or even more useful if you need to graph absolute values. So let's say I had to graph 3, math, go over to num, grab my absolute value bars, x plus 2 minus 5 will graph that absolute value function for me. So super useful to just know your calculator has absolute value in it. On the ACT, and just by a raise of hands, before I keep on referencing back to the ACT, how many, and I'm just going to pause you for 1 second. Sorry about that. I had my little Yorkie poo in the room with me, and I could tell that he was about to bark, and I was correct. So I just wanted to pause it for a second and get him out of here. I made an exception, and I knew he could not stay quiet for a full hour. Okay, by raise of hands, how many of you are also planning on taking the ACT? See if there's any hands. So I see one hand. So for the ACT, I see 2 hands. You do want to know when you go into math and then over to num, you can find the least common multiple and the greatest common denominator when you put in a list of numbers and you separate them using the comma. So if I said, let's say, greatest common denominator of 50, comma, 25, comma, 70, like that. Oops, I'm giving not a great. Let's just do 2 here. like that. That's what happens when I make up numbers, not great things. Okay, if we go to math and num, so just for the ECT, you would want to use least common multiple and greatest common denominator. For the ECT also, you will sometimes see permutations and combinations and factorials. I have not seen those on the SAT, but just know your calculator can do those too. And then for the SAT, you do want to know you can grab fraction bars from here, mixed numbers. So let's say I wanted to find 5 3/4 plus, I'm going to press math again, go to the left here, grab my mixed numbers, plus 8 and 2 over 21. That would be pretty icky to find a common denominator and add without a calculator. It gives me that fraction. I'm going to press math, go to the left here, and convert that fraction to a mixed number. So that would match up to an answer and very useful to use. So that's pretty much it for the math button. So remember, we can convert decimals to fractions, we can find the nth root, and we can use numeric solver for any linear equation. So I always tell students only use numeric solver, equation solver for linear equations, unless this is your only option other than a blind guess. If you're just going to blind guess on a question that has an equation that is not linear, just use this. It's better than guessing, but this should not be your preferred way to answer because this only gives one solution and it behaves not that well unless equations are linear. Okay, and then if we go into math, num, we have our absolute value bars, which we can use to put in an absolute value expression or to graph. And if I go to math and I go all the way over to fractions, I can put in fractions and mixed numbers. There's also a fractions shortcut to go alpha y equals to grab fraction bars. It's really up to you. And if you are taking the ACT, this is also where I go for matrices. That's my preferred way to get to matrices for the ACT, but that is not an issue for the SAT. Okay, so that's it for math. How many of you have ever used the stat button? I see 1 or 2 hands there. So the stat button is probably one of the easiest features to use in your calculator. So we're going to press stat and then edit to put in a list of numbers. Imagine I already had a list of numbers here, like just a random list of 5s. And I wanted to put in a new list of numbers. I wanted to clear that list. If I press clear right here, it's as if nothing happens. I have to go up and highlight list 1, and you highlight it just by hovering over it, and then press clear. And then when I go back down, the whole list is cleared. So I'm going to put in a list of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I could keep on just putting a new list instead of clearing lists. Sometimes students do that I've known, but just put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in list 1, and then we're going to press second mode to quit out of that, and then second stat. So remember, the first step of using the stat button is just to press stat and then edit. The second step is to press second stat, and then we're going to go over to math. Please don't get confused here. This is a different math than the math button on our home screen there on our keypad. We can find our mean, our median, or our standard deviation. Most of the time, I'm using the stat key to find the standard deviation. Every now and then, I will also use it to find the median, even though for the median, you can cross out the smallest, and then the biggest, and then the smallest, and then the biggest. I find that when I'm fatigued from taking a test, it's sometimes a nice break to just be 100% sure that you have the right answer and to use the stat button, even to find the median. But let's say we wanted the standard deviation. I'm going to press enter. There's an open parentheses here because the calculator needs us to tell it what we are trying to find the standard deviation of. So I'm going to press second stat and insert list 1. And it gives me the standard deviation of list 1. I could also press second stat, go over the math and let's find the median and press second stat, insert list one, and it gives me the median of that list. So the stat button is super easy and straightforward to use. So far, we've looked at apps, conics, circles, and equals for graphing inequalities and shading them, polysmelt for polynomial root finder and simultaneous equation solver. We've also looked at the I button on our home screen here. There's a couple of other smaller things I want to show you, and then just general things that I expect you would have already learned in school, but just in case you have not, I want to make sure that you don't leave today's workshop without knowing these exist. So first smaller thing is when I put a pi in my calculator, let's say I have 2 divided by 3 pi. That is not what 2 divided by 3 pi is equal to. Whenever we divide by something that has pi in it, so do you see how pi is in my denominator? I have to put the whole denominator inside parentheses. So really 2 divided by 3 pi equals 0.21. So I don't want you to miss an easy point just because you didn't know that. Another thing I want to show you is if I press my mode button, I can switch between radians and degrees. So let's say a calculator asks me, what is sine, or not a calculator, a question on the SAT asks me, what is sine of 30 degrees? I will want to make sure that my calculator has degrees highlighted there for that question. Every now and then your calculator may misbehave. So you go to graph something or you're trying to use an app and things are just not working. I want you to know that when you press second plus sign, so do you see mem there? You can go reset your calculator. So reset and then reset it to all defaults. Do not ever press all RAM, okay? Always press defaults. So we're going to press defaults and then reset to the defaults. And that generally fixes graphing issues. Something to note, if I go back to y equals and I try to graph that, it's going to look blank because I just reset my calculator. I have to go back here and just like put 5 in again or just write something in there. And then when I go to graph, it will graph it. It's just a little calculator glitch that happens. Okay, so we know our mode buttons, we know our memory button, whoops, second mem. This is also where you can go to just clear all your list. So if I go here, oops, I had something else in there. So second plus sign, clear all lists, it will clear all the lists for me. So now if I go to stat edit, it's blank, it's a blank slate. Okay. How many, before I spend time on this, does anyone not know how to graph a parabola and find the vertex and the x-intercepts for a parabola in a graphing calculator? Or does everyone know that? Does anyone not know how to do that? I see one hand. Okay, so we're going to do it even for one because there are going to be students watching this recording back. So we're going to go to y equals, and I'm just going to put in x squared minus 6. And I get this parabola. If I need to calculate the vertex, in this case, it's a minimum because this parabola opens up. So I'm going to press second trace. Do you see above trace, it says calc? So we're going to calculate the vertex. So we're going to say minimum. And then it's going to say left bound. So we're going to go to the left of the vertex and press enter. And then to the right of the vertex and press enter. And we're going to go to the vertex and press enter. And it's going to give us our minimum is at x is 0, y equals -6. We can also use this feature, the calculate feature, to calculate each of those zeros, those x-intercepts. Zeros equals x-intercepts pretty much. So we're going to go to second trace. And then 0. And for our x-intercepts, we calculate them one at a time. So we're going to go left bound to the left of the x-intercept and press enter. Right bound to go to the right of it and press enter. And then kind of hover near the x-intercept and press enter. And it gives us that x-intercept. And we can repeat the same procedure for the other 0. Now let's say I had another equation here. I had y equals negative x. And I wanted to find the solutions. I wanted to find those intersection points. I could find them one at a time by going second trace, intersect, and we're going to say first curve, enter, second curve, enter, and then just guess that point, and it gives me that intersection. So that's one of the solutions for this paragraphs would be 2 comma negative 2. When x equals 2, y equals negative 2, that would be a solution. For graphing in general, I rarely change my window, if ever. I would argue I maybe have changed it one time for and like 10,000 questions or more. So I really never change the window for the SAT or the ACT. Instead, I'm going to use my zoom button. So I'm going to zoom out if I need to. Just remember you have to actually press enter again to zoom out. So I'll zoom out and I'll zoom in. And I'll say Z standard if I just want to reset my zoom to the regular zoom. So let's say I'm really zoomed out super far. And then for the next question, I want to zoom back in. Instead of going zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, I would just say Z standard. If I ever graph a trig function, and this would be more for the ACT than the SAT, I don't think I've ever seen the College Board expect students to graph trig functions. But let's say I was graphing sine x, I would go to zoom and then go to Z trig to graph a trig function. Now, something weird happens with graphing. Let's say I had 0.5x minus 2, and I graphed that. And I went to my table. I press second graph to go to my table. Do you see how these all have decimal values for my y coordinates? And that is because my equation had decimals in them. And generally, this is not problematic. But let's say you were plugging in all the answer choices that were equations into your calculator and graphing them and looking at the table to match the table in the question that they gave you. And the table and the question that they gave you had fractions. You do not want to spend time converting any of these numbers to fractions. You want to be able to just go back to y equals, and we're going to change that 0.5 to a fraction half. So I'm going to press alpha y equals, my shortcut for the fraction bars, make that 1/2. And then I'm going to press graph. And now when I go to my table, all those y values are fractions, which would make it super easy, speedy to match up an equation to the table. So I'm going to stop my share for a second. Those are the big things that I want you to know. There are still a lot of little fun tricks in the graphing calculator, but I want to make sure that I stick to the things that are going to help you the most on test day for today's workshop. And we already covered so much ground. I want to make sure that we also get the opportunity to apply these concepts to some questions, because I think the concepts really come alive when you see them applied to questions. So let's see here. Oh, I'm actually going to share my whole screen. And we're going to pull questions from all over the place. We're going to pull them from the practice test that I sent to you, but we're also going to pull them from all sorts of other practice tests so that you get the best overview. And not every practice test will give you an opportunity for all of these features. That's why I'll be jumping a little bit all over the place. So one of the most useful things I could possibly ever teach you for the calculator is to start thinking about one side of an equation. So we're going to see this equation here. And this is from module 2 for math and practice test 1 that I shared with you, is to think of one side of an equation as y1 and the other side as y2. And you could use that for pretty much any equation. So we're going to go to y equals, and I'm slightly overcomplicating this because you could solve this pretty easily without a calculator, but I want you to know this concept so that you can use it for a harder question down the road. So I'm going to press math, num absolute, and I'm going to have 4x minus 4. That's one side of the equation. My other side of the equation is 112. And I'm going to graph. And I'm going to zoom out. And I'm going to zoom out even more. And I'm going to zoom out even more. There we go. So where these graphs intersect is the solution. And you could use this for an exponential equation, for an equation containing a radical, pretty much any equation. So then I'm going to press second trace, intersect, and we're going to say first curve, enter, second curve, enter, guess, enter. And it gives me my intersection is when x equals 29. And they want to know what is a positive value of x minus 1. So that's just 29 minus 1, or 28. Okay, so that's a very easy type of question to just plug in to your graphing calculator. This one too, what is the diameter of the circle in the XY plane with this equation? We could just, if you didn't know, and I hope that you're going to study those math core concepts, I didn't emphasize today how important they are for the SAT, but they are incredibly important for SAT math, that you know all the core concepts. And this equation is in the core concepts. But let's say this equation was not in the simple form, it was in standard form, or you just blanked on test day. We could go to apps and then conics, circle that first equation, and then put x minus 5, y minus 3 equals 4 squared, and press alpha, enter, and it gives me my radius is 4, so my diameter is 8. It's kind of a silly one to use it on. More often, I would use it, on something like, let me grab it. This one. In the XY plane, the graph of this equation is a circle. What is the radius of the circle? If we didn't have our calculator, we would have to complete the square. So I'm going to press enter here, and I'm going to put my A in as 2, my B is -6, my C is 2. Remember, C is just your Y coefficient. And then do you see how here for the question it equals 45? But in my calculator, it equals 0. So I need to subtract 45 from both sides, and then my D is -45. That's the hardest part of this question. And then I'm just going to press alpha, enter, and it gives me my radius equals 5. So answer choice A is the right answer. A lot of times students will accidentally use this minus sign here. So they'll say -45 like that. And when you press alpha enter, it will give you an error message. So you need to use this little negative sign next to the enter button down here for the -45, and then hit alpha enter. Okay, let's see some other fun ones here that we can just go straight into the calculator. The system of equations above is graphed in the XY plane. What is the x coordinate of the intersection point XY of the system? We're going to go to apps, and then Polysmelt, and then simultaneous equation solver. 2 equations, 2 unknowns. Press graph for next, and then I can say 2.4, enter, minus 1.5, enter, equals 0.3, enter, 1.6, enter, plus 0.5, enter, equals -1.3, enter. And then I'm going to press graph to solve it. And I can press graph again. Do you see at the bottom right of the screen, it's F and then the arrows and then D? That's for toggling between fractions and decimals. So I'm going to press graph, and I can toggle my X coordinate to a decimal. So I know the answer here is -0.5. So super easy in the calculator. Let's do kind of a tricky one in the calculator that So if you ever take an advanced math workshop with me, by a raise of hands, have any of you taken an advanced math workshop with me? I don't see anyone. Or if you're taking the SAT Pro course with me, I know some of you are signed up for that too, which is great. I go into how to solve these kinds of questions where we have two expressions, and then a constant, and we have to find that constant, how to solve them by hand without using a calculator and get them right all the time. But a lot of these can also be solved using a graphing calculator. So if I think of each equation as its own graph, they're equal to each other when the graphs overlap. So let me show you what I mean. And this really will be one of the most useful things you learn today, other than knowing the apps and all the features in your calculator. So I can plug in all these answer choices for A. So I'm going to go to y equals, and we're going to press alpha y equals, grab the fraction bars, and I'm going to put in 24x squared plus 25x minus 47 over, and I'm just plugging in answer choice A there, negative 16x minus 2. So that's the one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is negative 8x minus 3 minus alpha y equals, grab my fraction bars, 53 over negative 16x minus 2. When I go to graph this, those graphs do not overlap. It's really clear. There are two graphs there and they are not overlapping. So I'm going to go back to y equals, and I'm going to change my negative 16 for A to negative 3. So instead of having to rewrite all of these, I can very quickly just change the negative 16 to negative 3, press graph, and let's see what happens. Oh, they overlap perfectly. So the answer here is B, because they overlapped perfectly. Let me show you a real SAT question, and that was a real SAT questions. All question singular. All the questions we've looked at so far today are real SAT questions, but I want to show you one from a few years ago that a lot of my students answered correctly because they knew that if the graphs overlap, the expressions are equivalent. So let me go grab it. I just need to go to all notes in my iPad and keep my fingers crossed that it opens, and then go grab it. Okay. So I'm going to show you this on my iPad first, and then we'll do it in the calculator. So this question asked, which of the following is equivalent to the expression Roman numerals 1 or Roman numeral 2? So if these Roman numerals, if we factored those expression, we would see they're both equivalent. But let's say you just didn't know how to factor it, or it didn't occur to you to factor. We could graph that original expression, graph each of the Roman numerals without simplifying them whatsoever. And if the graphs overlap, they are equivalent. So let's see what that looks like. So if I go to y equals, and I put in x to the 4th power minus 8x squared plus 16 for y1, and for y2, I'm going to put in the first Roman numeral. So x plus 2 squared times x minus 2 squared, and I'm going to press graph. Did you see that there? I'm just going to go to Z standard so it's not so zoomed out. It's perfectly overlapping. So Roman numeral 1 is equivalent. And for Roman numeral 2, I am going to put in x squared minus 4 squared. And when I graph that, perfectly overlapping again. So yes, equivalent. And I am going to share my whole screen here again so that we can look at more just side by side with the graphing calculator. So there's this one question here that is from the advanced math handout from past workshops, but it actually recently appeared on a digital SAT. The College Board loves this question. So it says in the XY plane, and just so you know, whenever a question says in the XY plane, they are hinting to you to consider graphing or to consider using your graphing calculator. That is a clue. So a lot of the time when I'm reading in the XY plane, I am going to use my graphing calculator or draw a quick graph. Every now and then, the rest of the details will be so complicated that I will not graph. So it's not 100% rule, 100% of the time, but most of the time. So in the XY plane, a line that has the equation y equals c, can anyone tell me, is y equals c vertical or horizontal if y equals a number? Y equals c for some constant c intersects a parabola at exactly 1 point. Is that a vertical or a horizontal line if y equals a number? Now remember, you have your calculator. So if you didn't know, you can just pick a number for y, say y equals 2, and go graph that. And then you see, oh, it's horizontal. You guys have an answer key when you have a graphing calculator for this test. There are so many questions that are pretty much freebie questions, and you just have to remember you have the key when you have your calculator. So y equals 2. So we know that's a horizontal line intersects a parabola at exactly 1 point. So I'm just going to draw a regular parabola in my calculator too. Okay, so, oh, they give me the parabola equation. I can put in that one. So negative x squared plus 5x is my parabola equation. And there's some horizontal line that intersects a parabola only one time. So I need to think, where does that horizontal line need to go through? It has to go through that vertex of the parabola if it's only going to intersect the parabola at 1 point. So I'm going to delete my 2, my y equals 2 there that I used just to navigate this question. And then I'm going to press second trace, maximum. And I'm going to see left bound, so to the left of that maximum, and press enter, and then right bound and press enter, and then hover over the maximum and press enter, and it gives me my maximum is at x equals 2.4999 and y equals 6.25. And they want to know what is the value of c, and y equals c, so we need the y value. So y equals 6.25 for that question. And it's super straightforward in the calculator. Okay, let's see if there's any other ones I want to look at in the calculator for this handout. I don't think so. Let's look on practice test 1. If there are any, oh, not in that practice test 1. I actually wanted to look. Let's talk a little bit. I want to see by a raise of hands, how many of you would be curious or interested in how to back solve using your calculator if you don't know what to do? How you can use your calculator to back solve. Okay, so let's see this question here. Which expression is equivalent to a 11/12? So we have a couple of options here. We could graph all of those. I don't know what my calculator is going to think about me when I try to graph it, but technically I could say like x to the 11/12 power, graph that. And then when I go to graph the answer, so I'm going to say second math, whoops, not second math, sorry. I'm going to just press math and then grab my nth root. So 12th root of x to the 132 power. And mind you, my Core Concepts handout does have on there how to simplify these. So a to the 11/12 would be the root is 12, and the variable's exponent is 11. And for all of these, you could turn them to fractions too for fractional exponents. I'm going to graph that. Oh, those graphs don't overlap. So it can't be answer choice A. Answer choice B, I'm going to change that to 144. And I'm going to keep that as x to the 132. Oh, it doesn't overlap, doesn't work. I am going to change this to 121 and keep that as 132, doesn't overlap. And then I actually think it was answer choice B. I don't know why I did it so weird. 11 and then 132. Yeah, it's answer choice B. So B was the one that got the closest. Or C, no, it was B. The 144 and then 132. Let me zoom out a little bit. I think it's just how I'm zoomed. Yeah, they do overlap. So by hand, I'm going to show you too how to do that by hand. Boom, boom, boom. And I'm just going to put that right here. So they want to know what is equivalent to a to the 11/12th power. So if we had the 144th root of a to the 132, that would equal a to the 132 over 144, which if I divide 132, let's see, by 12, that's going to be 11. And if I divide 144 by 12, that's going to be 12. So that equals a to the 11 over 12. You could also do something else in your calculator, and the things you can do in your calculator are really endless, and I'm so passionate about it. And I wish I had 3 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours to just keep on showing you everything you can do in your calculator. So it makes the test so much easier, but we'll leave you with this last one. I can pick a number for A because all of the answer choices have A and they tell me A is greater than 0. So let's say A equals 2. So I'm going to say 2 and then store that, and I'm just going to use X because X is easier to use. So now whenever I put an X in my calculator, it thinks it's 2. X is my variable. So for my original expression, I'm going to say X to the 11 over 12 power, and it gives me a number. So I want an answer choice that also equals 1.8877. So for answer choice, oops, there, 1.88. So I'm going to go math, and then the nth root, and we're going to say 12. And then x to the 132 power, and that does not equal it, right? Then we're going to try answer choice B, and I'm going to say 144 x to the 132. It does equal it. So we know answer choice B is equal. Do you guys have any questions for me before I let you go today? And thank you so much for joining me. I'm so proud of all of you for spending some of your Saturday working on improving your SAT and ACT scores and learning more about the graphing calculator. This is going to help you so much when you take practice tests and really work on your SAT knowledge. But does anyone have any questions for me? I'm going to just open it up to questions in the chat, and I'm also going to share this program evaluation with you in the chat that is on my website, and I'll show you how to get there too. It's completely anonymous. It helps me gauge what you got from the workshop, how useful it was, and it also helps me plan future workshops. So if you go to my website and then you go to more, over here, and then program evaluation, you can put your grade, your school name, and then what you found most valuable, what you would like more of in the future, if you have any thoughts or comments, if you have any requests, how you heard about this program, and anything else that you've attended in the past. And that really helps me when I'm planning workshops. A lot of the workshops that I'm offering this summer and that I will offer in the fall are based on feedback that I received from students even years ago. They have an impact. So if not for you, do it for the next cohort of students that will need to prep for the SAT or the ACT. So I don't see any questions which is pretty remarkable. And I think you can all, let's see here. Oh no. I wish someone put in the Q&A. Now you can put questions. I didn't have that enabled at all. You can always add that to the Q&A feature. Remember, that's always available. So now you should be able to send a message if that was frozen for you before. So let's see if there are any questions. I wanted to say that is very strange that no one had any questions, but you should be able to put a question. So if you are here and you still hear me, at least put in there no questions so that I know you don't have any questions. And then I will let you go for today. We'll end the workshop. Okay, so I don't see any questions still. So I am going to take it that you guys understood everything that I went over. I know that was really fast, but I really wanted to make sure that we just lay the foundation and that you get the most out of this hour. Thank you so much again for joining me today. I hope to see you back for more workshops later this summer, or maybe even the SAT Pro course that starts next month already. Okay, have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.